This
24
conference
years
will now
old
be recorded.
next December, a year from this this month. It'll be 25 years old. It started with Sandy Island and the protection of Sandy Island, and it has evolved into a 35,000 acre national wildlife refuge. We have done some incredible work with our partners of protecting open space, providing a venue for environmental education at Johanna Bluff, and a recreation area near Conway that's right beside Coastal Carolina University. It has been a fabulous experience for me as we've acquired properties. We've gone through various planning phases to map out what the future holds for the refuge, and in many cases, the public helps us make this plan. When we bought Cox Ferry Lake Recreation Area initially, the Coastal Carolina cross country team was jogging through there because it was a beautiful run through a swamp and forested wetland between Coastal Carolina University campus and a loop that they crafted, and as we realized that it was a great place for people to go out and be in nature, so close to Conway and Myrtle Beach and a lot of growth. It was a very eye-opening experience as we went through that and put in nature trails and boardwalks and eventually a fishing pier. And so a lot of these processes have been evolutionary. We've listened to the public. We've had a lot of business partners. One of the most important things that I learned at the very beginning of this refuge was a petition that was signed by 100 local businesses. There were a lot of petitions in favor of the refuge and a lot of petitions that were concerned citizens about a future federal refuge in their community. And we listened. We had lots of meetings and we provided feedback. But that 100 local businesses signing that petition was probably one of the biggest factors in gaining federal support from our legislators. They really paid attention to businesses and their interest. And so I saw that, and as we evolved a lot of the different projects and incorporated a lot of the projects in a refuge, we tried to make sure that we work close with the community and gain a better understanding of what the community needs were, and trying to craft that and model it into the format of a national wildlife refuge. The refuge system in general is wildlife first. So our main purpose and mission is protecting wildlife habitat, but there's a human component to that, which incorporates lots of other uses. Some of them are direct consumers, hunters and fishermen, and some are indirect consumers like kayakers, birders, photographers, environmental education, interpretation, a lot of those components. And so it's really important to incorporate that into our scoping meetings and get the best feedback that we can possibly get to plan out the future. Hasty Point is a very unique acquisition for the refuge. We have a number of historic properties, but this is a very unique historic property in that it was not only a rice plantation, it's got a lot of historical records that go back to even before the Revolutionary War, but definitely included the Revolutionary War. And then there's the whole rice culture component. There's a historic rice barn. And one of the things that we hope to do in the future, we experimented with this year, is to reintroduce Carolina gold and grow rice there. Not just for wildlife or not just for the cultural history side, but the combination, the rice farmers, the technology, the understanding of not just the crop, but also the wildlife interactions. Waterfowl in particular were used to clean up rice fields after the rice was harvested, so there wasn't waste seed or seed that would come back voluntarily next year that would change the quality of rice. So the managers would put water on these areas and allow waterfowl to feed on that rice to clean it up. And it's a really important component of this area, not just the rich cultural history, but the importance to migratory birds that came from the rice culture. So our hope is to blend history, the cultural aspects of this area, the historic components, and all of that into the fabric of the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge. So again, I appreciate feedback. I appreciate the input. I think Laura will mention other meetings that we're having in this week and next week, next 2 weeks. And I look forward to interacting with anybody before, during, or after the meetings. And I appreciate you being here tonight, giving us your time. Thank you.
As we go through the slideshow here, Craig may want to add a note or two among some of the more noteworthy photos. Randy, could we start the slideshow?
I'll just mention this is an aerial drone. It was drone footage of some rice fields. There's some longleaf pine. That is a longleaf pine restoration area that has red cockaded woodpeckers, and we've reintroduced fire into this area. It was established before we acquired it, but we are nurturing this longleaf pine forest. There's an incredible live oak avenue that takes you from the Plantersville Road, which is a scenic byway, to the PD River, which is a scenic river. So it's a really unique opportunity, a combination of a scenic byway and a scenic river connected by a land that is now part of Waccamaw Refuge. There's a lot of wildlife there, including alligators. It's a picture of the rice barn and the carriage house that are on the property. Our hope is to use that carriage house for environmental education in the future. Live oak over the big bluff overlooking the Great PD. This is a picture of the main house that we were looking at possibly repurposing for future dormitories or something that we will incorporate into the refuge. This is a rice field that we actually planted rice in this year. Another view of the Live Oak Avenue. There's plenty of wildlife there. Another shot of the rice barn. There's a dock facility on the property inside of the rice barn. That's the inside view from the main house overlooking the river. Some artifacts that the previous owner, Bob Schofield, preserved that were found on the property.
want to mention briefly Bob Schofield, his generosity?
Yes, the previous owner, for those that you do not know, Bob Schofield and his family, sold the property to the refuge. They were very patient in doing so, and even provided some management support for the refuge to help us. A lot of that's been we've been using on restoration of the rice field and some other work, and their generosity has been really the catalyst for most of this that we've been able to achieve. Thank you.
Great. I mentioned earlier, Craig really is the architect of this acquisition, and quite considered quite successful in having attained this for the refuge. So our firm has been retained in order to develop a plan for moving Hasty Point forward in conjunction with the refuge. And I want to just take a brief moment to interview some of the folks on our team who have helped us through this process in terms of community outreach. And of course, our part of our community outreach is providing some great local low country cooking, which is by Ms. Laura Harriet. And we have Ms. Zenobia Harper, who is a longtime artist and activist in the community. Thank you, Zenobia. And so Zenobia will be helping within the audience collect your thoughts and get the microphone to you for your comments. So before we start talking about your specific comments, I've given you all a pad and paper so that we can first do an exercise. I'd like everyone to think a little bit more about a couple of things. So on the first page of paper, I'd like you to write down, and folks at home, I hope you're able to do the same, and we'll collect those from you. You can send those in to us or perhaps post them on the chat. But I'd like you to think, number one, if anything were possible, and we all know not everything is possible, but this is blue sky. If anything were possible, what needs do you have that could be met at a property like Hasty Point? Whether it's recreation, whether it's just helping with conservation, just observing nature, whatever it might be, sky's the limit. Tell us what you would like to see at a property like Hasty Point. That's your first exercise. The second exercise is, what unmet community needs could Hasty Point provide? I know you're all very involved in the community. And from what you've seen over the years, and what you know the community could use, what are your perceptions of how this could meet some unmet community needs? So first, be a little bit selfish and think about what it could do for you, and then think about what this could do for unmet community needs. So just take a few minutes to write those down, and then we'll have a discussion. Craig, maybe you should be writing them down too. And I believe folks online, you can submit questions to the chat, comments. Randy will be very graciously taking those. Randy, do you have anything yet?
No, I've got the chat up there on the screen, so you should be able to see whenever anything comes in.
Oh, I can see them on the screen. Okay. Wonderful. I'd just like to give a shout out to Jackie Broach and Randy Akers, who've done such a terrific job in setting this all up for us to have a dual audience. So please make use of the microphones if you're comfortable. And have us step up and tell us what you have on your list. And why. Hi, what's your name?
Hi, my name is Ebony Hughes. So first of all, I appreciate this open forum. It's much needed. I think that's something that one of the needs of the community is that they want to be included and involved in what's happening. So this is a great thing. I appreciate that. And it didn't take me long to come up because I sort of already had my answers months in advance. From my understanding, you correct me if I'm wrong, there was a survey that was put out earlier in the year.
Well, there was just to clarify, there was a survey put out by the folks who are working on the state park along Black River. So yeah, there are those survey results, and then we are going to be doing a survey specifically about Hasty Point once we gather this input. So it'll be a second survey and an additional opportunity to provide feedback.
Perfect. So I completed that survey earlier in the year, which I put a lot of thought into it. Was assuming that we would get some type of feedback or response from that survey. So some of the things that I noted then, and then I'm noting now with the presentation, as it pertains to the video, I think that because hundreds of enslaved people had worked that land and you're wanting to include the rice culture in that, I think that it's important to have the educational piece if you don't already have that, but it's also important, I think, in how you present that educational information. Who's that coming from? How are they going to be selected? The second thing is, I think that part of there might be a little bit confusion because I was confused. People may not understand exactly what is a refuge for. So I think when you're putting information out, that they need to know what a refuge is and how that impacts the surrounding area. Okay. I think that would people have questions about how is revenue generated? Will the taxes go up on their land as a result of that? Will the property value, their property value, increase or decrease because of this venture? Also, my concern is the cultural equity and inclusion. So a lot of money is getting ready to be generated because of the African American culture. That's part of it is rice that began with them. That's why their labor was used. And I think that it's important that as those funds are generated, that money be pumped back into the African American community. I'm talking about that could be discussed maybe into African businesses, which I see you have done that tonight, but include the African American businesses that can offer and provide those type of services for education because they do exist. So it's important to make that that connection with the community. And the other thing is, which I had in that survey is, has anyone contacted the local Native American tribes? We can't forget that before rice, before indigo, there was the Native American communities there. And from my understanding, I don't know if the chief has been contacted for their input so that if they have any information, education, those type of things, again, as money's being generated, that those go to support those Native American local businesses. Also, can local businesses bid on some of these services? You mentioned kayaking, boating, tourism. How do all those things come into play? And I think from my notes here, those are the things that we should consider. I would love to hear some feedback about how this information is being used. I am a local business owner, so I am actually putting in my 2 cents because I would also like to be included in this project. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, absolutely. You've given it a lot of thought, and that's so valuable. Just to address each one, Native American, the Native American organizations are being contacted. I believe they were advised of these meetings. But aside from that, we're also doing one-on-one interviews with key constituents to ensure that we have their feedback. And let me assure you that from day one, when we started working with the National Wildlife Refuge, the first priority was the community and was the indigenous population and their needs and supporting them and ensuring that whatever's done there is done in a way that benefits them culturally, socially, and economically. So, so that's definitely a priority, and we would love to have you even further involved if you would like to be. We have a group that is kind of an unofficial advisory board. It's very diverse and it's very flexible. So I think we could certainly think about having you included in that to ensure that we're thinking about your feedback every step of the way. So thank you very much for that. Now, you talked very, very eloquently and really focused about community, which is terrific. Anything personal for you? Because my first question is what you personally might like to see there. Like, is there something you'd like to be out there doing, either recreationally, educationally, whatever, that you can't right now or is not convenient for you? Microphone, please. Zenobia, do you have a traveling microphone, right?
I personally would like to provide some type of tour for the Gullah community. I am actually also part Waccamaw Native American.
Oh,
so,
excellent.
but in the terms of I identify mostly culturally growing up with the Gullah community and providing some type of tour and education. So those can be a combination of experiences. And I would, if there's a place or space to also participate in advisory, community outreach, that's also good as well, if possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we'd love to have your contact information afterwards, and we should capture this sign in. Oh, Zenobia's already handled that. Thank you. Tommy?
Appreciate your comments, Ebony. It happens, I wear several hats, I guess, a citizen. I'm a freelance journalist for the Georgetown Times. I'm the secretary of the Choppee Indian Nation of South Carolina and also involved with the Boy Scouts. And I know there's been, with this effort and the Black River, let's see, Water Trail Network and State Park, or whatever that official title is.
And could you state your name for those who may not know?
Tommy Howard. Thanks.
Tommy.
Yes. Tommy Howard.
Tommy Howard for those
Right.
online.
The public input session for the Black River State Park, as you mentioned, they have done similar kinds of things as to what this is tonight. And related to that effort, there was a meeting in Columbia with about a half a dozen Indian tribes and Mariah Whitehead of the Open Space Institute and some other folks talking about the need for education on Indians, Native Americans. Chief Buster Hatcher of the Waccamaw Indian people was the one who kind of contacted the various chiefs of the Indian tribes to let them know about that meeting. And Vernon Tompkins is the chief of the Choppee Indian Nation. That's the tribe that I'm a member of. And I don't have any Indian blood, but I'm an adopted or honorary member of the tribe. And they were among those at the meeting. They offered input. I would imagine Mariah would certainly have records from that meeting that she could share for Hasty Point. And interestingly, Ebony, several of the points that you had were things that I also wrote down. Combination of the cultural impact of the enslaved Americans and of the Indians who have been here for so long. And I know that several folks have commented that Plantersville still has the image of being where sort of the rice plantation owners' refuge from some of the I forget, they called it the swamp air or the miasma, I believe. But after the plantations basically ceased operating, the black people who lived in that area have continued. And the fact is they were planters as well. They were the planters, really. Some of the plantation owners probably did a little bit of work, but I would imagine 98 or 99% of the work was done by the enslaved people. And I think all of that needs to be a part of whatever interpretive history for Hasty Point and the refuge and for the Black River State Park. In fact, for that at Rocky Point, the Ticora Indian Nation has been in conversations about possibly having a permanent presence on that property where we can share some of the Indian heritage and tie in with the refuge and where the education center is. That was apparently pretty much a place for a trading post in pre-Revolutionary War years with Indians and some of the early settlers and whatnot. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to meld all of those things in the cultural aspect for the community and help folks understand there's so much more that goes into life than just the cursory look that we all might have from time to time.
And anything there for you personally, Tommy? That sounds like a great community contribution.
I love the concept of educational, environmental information. My knees and legs probably wouldn't allow me personally to do as much walking and hiking on trails as what I would like to do. Maybe some Segway scooters, Greg. But I think, while I would not be able to do a long hike, such as some that I have done in the past, that would be fantastic. And if I can rebuild my strength and get my knee to be in better shape, I would probably enjoy some of that as well. And I think the video shows just a nice sampling of the wide variety of what photographers can find, but also folks in general, whether they own a camera of any sort or not. I recently shared on my personal Facebook page. I grew up in Georgetown. I was at USC in Columbia. And when my wife and I first started dating there, I was so overwhelmed by the big city of Columbia and the University of South Carolina that on one Sunday in February, and it was 27 or 30 degrees, I said to her, I'd love to go out to the Sesquicentennial State Park and listen to the quiet. My wife thought I was nuts, especially because it was so cold, but we did that. And we didn't spend actually but about 20 minutes out there because it was so cold, but it was good for my soul to be able to do that and to have that spot available 10 or 12 miles from downtown Columbia, something like that, to be able to go and listen to the quiet. I think a place like Hasty Point, the other parts of the refuge, Rocky Point Community Forest, all of those are wonderful assets for our community to be able to do that, whether it's literally to listen to the quiet or just to be out in nature. That's something that I treasure being able to get to. And I think a lot of folks would also enjoy that.
Thank you, Tommy.
Yes, good evening. My name is Steve Williams. I'm a local resident and a historian. I've recently been asked to serve on the committee at the Maritime Museum here in Georgetown. And to your question of what personally I would like to see, I have to say that I am woefully ignorant of wildlife. I was raised in the city, although my folks are from Georgetown, so I don't know much about it. And I'm actually afraid of alligators and all of that. But here's what I'd like to comment on. One of the things I like when they asked me to be on the Maritime Museum, because there's a new exhibit there, is they named the exhibit Changing the Narrative. changing the narrative. And while I applaud what my friend Tommy Howard said, and I know many of the Native Americans identify as Indians, but we have to understand that Columbus was lost trying to get to India when he came to the so-called New World, and they did not identify themselves as Indians. Just as we no longer use the word slave, but enslaved, because no one is a slave, but many have been enslaved, we must use the term Native American, even when they themselves don't always use it. What I'm interested in is knowing, because I'm basically a historian, how we can connect the true history before the great planters or Europeans came aboard, because I happen to know there are many people who are of mixed blood. One case in point is Philip Washington, the great Philip Washington, the patriarch of Sandy Island. Well, several prominent writers, including George Rogers, said that he was of two bloods. He was mixed blood, Native American. They described him as a fine specimen for his race, but we don't know which race because he was mixed. And I feel and I know that another gentleman by the name of Abraham Harriet, also from Sandy Island, his grandfather and his father, both named July, but again, that's the anglicized term. The Native American have their own language. And so I'm interested in how they treated the land, because here we are trying to preserve it decades, centuries later, but they must have found ways to preserve that land. Secondly, I'm interested in how, because we know so much about the cultivation of rice and other crops that my ancestors were literally brought here for, but we know very little about the maritime connection. And so I'm interested in how they were doing that, including the simple things as fishing, how to deal with wildlife, alligators without guns, because obviously they were not allowed to have weapons. There's so much that I believe can be learned. And so I would be interested in that. And I also want to co-sign or echo what Ms. Hughes was saying. It is necessary, it's incumbent upon us to involve all races, all cultures that had something to do with it. If you check the history books of Georgetown, you find a lot of history about the great plantations, the opulence and the splendor of these plantations, but very little is written about their contributions in other areas. So I'd love to see that.
And anything personally for you, something personally you'd like to have more access to that you don't now?
I'd like to see everything on video because I'm not an outdoors person. I really am not.
Vanessa, will you share with us?
Sure. I have a question about.
Let's give a microphone.
I have a question about housing facilities. Are there facilities there now for overnight stays? And if not, do you anticipate having facilities for people who might want to come in and have retreats and so forth?
Right. It's there are beds there now because there were 2 residences there. Well, actually, there are a couple more residences than that, smaller ones. And it's all up for debate whether or not those would be available for renting and in what capacity they would be rented, in what context. But it's certainly a possibility, and we're hoping to understand more, about the community need before those decisions are made.
Are there currently facilities available for like day-long workshops if someone or a group wanted to have a workshop there?
That's another option. There's definitely space for meetings of a whole wide variety of types. And so what we would like to hear is what meetings would you want to hold there? What groups do you belong to that you could envision would want to have the opportunity to meet at Hasty Point?
Yeah, because I mean, they've art groups, artists, principally,
Yeah.
and who might come and stay in the area for 4 or 5 nights at a time, who need accommodations that are simple and low cost. I took some people to Hopcaw Barony a couple of weeks ago, and we stayed in one of the University of South Carolina accommodations there, just to see how comfortable it was and to check out their facilities. I think Hasty Point is so physically beautiful that, it would be wonderful to be able to do the same there.
Mhm. Yeah, and keep in mind too that there's a mission to the refuge, right? And what its purpose is. And so another variable is to ensure that whatever is done there is in line with that mission. And Craig, if you want to jump in at any point, Zenobia's got a microphone.
I appreciate it. There's a lot of things that I'd like to just quickly address because I think it's really important that you get feedback to your questions tonight and beyond. But to your question, typically, for example, with our visitor center, our environmental ed center, we get requests to have teacher retreats like before school starts in the summer, a number of other requests. Law enforcement sometimes needs it, but basically what we've done is we said as long as there's a wildlife relationship or a conservation relationship, and I would argue that opportunities for cultural programs, those type things would be cultural conservation, but basically we've set the parameters on the use of some of our existing facilities that are open now to the public. That is, we do it free of charge. If there's public meetings that have some relationship, might be a highway project, but it's impacting wildlife habitat, we try to weave that in there. So that is our overarching, and with any use, I don't want to get into a bunch of bureaucracy, but we have to do a compatibility determination for anything we do. So when we are asked to do canoe kayak tours or wildlife interpretation or any number of things, we have to look at the purpose of the refuge, and we have to do a compatibility determination that basically shows that the purpose and use is compatible with the purpose of the refuge. For Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, obviously wildlife and habitat conservation are a top priority, but we also added to our establishing purpose recreational opportunities. It came about because in 1997, when we were leading up to 97, when we established Refuge, the Refuge Improvement Act came out, and it specified what the refuge system would consider for uses, and they include hiking, and some refuges allow biking, and there's a lot of different uses. So the recreational side was built in, and to the point about local businesses. So one of the things that I feel very proud about with the refuge, there are a number of concessionaires that have canoe trips or kayak trips or local businesses that really and truly, because of some of the regulations in the county, can't operate out of a public boat ramp. They can't take money at a public boat ramp. So they're really restricted in where they can access the river. And so we issue special use permits. So a lot of these operators can operate out of the refuge when they might not have another option. So I kind of view the refuge as a whole as a business incubator. And I would like to think that Hasty Point eventually could help with, the last thing I want to do is have the refuge take away opportunities for local businesses. I want it to be a springboard. So if there's opportunities for eco-tours or there's community relationships with Hasty Point or any other part of the refuge that helps promote a business, whether it's a restaurant or it's a hotelier or a bed and breakfast or any number of things, I like to think that this refuge will help provide opportunities for the community. Another question you'd asked about land acquisition and how it impacts. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service pays a fee in lieu of taxes. We're tax exempt with the federal government, but we pay a fee to the county every year for lands that we own. And I can't remember what 2021 payments were to Georgetown, Horry County, but I want to say in the neighborhood of about $40,000 to $50,000 to each county. So we're paying fees in lieu of taxes. In many ways, I want to say our land acquisition program, it doesn't raise taxes, but it allows landowners options to sell family farms and properties that are in our acquisition boundary. But we only buy from willing sellers, and in many regards, and Sandy Island's a perfect example. I would say that the refuge being around that island and being part of that island has helped preserve that community and their private property ownerships, just like other properties around the refuge. So those are just a few things that I really appreciate the feedback, and as far as the Native American cultural side of this, we are very much in tune. Any time we have to do a federal action, we have to do coordination, tribal coordination, but we also have had a couple of events where we've coordinated with local and nationally recognized tribes. So I definitely want to say that is a big part of our of what we are and what we do, and so I really appreciate the feedback in that regard. And I think that's pretty much most of the questions that have come up so far. So anyway, I like the opportunity to provide the feedback, and we've had many public meetings throughout the career or history of this refuge and had a lot of input, and some of the questions are unique to Hasty Point, but we get these questions on a regular basis. And you know, Laura asked me to fill out the questionnaire myself, but you know, I want feedback from the community. The reason we hired a consultant was I wanted to keep myself out of the main circle of folks that are visionaries that are laying this out, because I really want to see the unique opportunity that we have here crafted into something that I feel like will not just be something that Georgetown, Horry County and the local communities around will be proud of, but will be a national model for the National Wildlife Refuge System to really embrace communities and the cultural side. And this particular area has so much history. And I completely agree. I grew up working in a lot of these areas, managing for wildlife, and they're the most inhospitable places that anybody could ever want to work in. And there are a lot of wildlife that bite, sting, attack, make you sick. There's so many things that I don't think anybody really understands the harsh environmental conditions of clearing swamp and converting a lot of this landscape into rice fields and bringing the technology. But at the same time, one of the most fascinating things is that these rice fields, these marshes they're healing slowly, very slowly. They're healing from the land use changes that occurred. And at the same time, they are one of the largest carbon sequestration areas in the United States. So they are absorbing carbon. They are doing things to help as they heal there and go back to things that they were before a lot of this was transformed. They are doing things that improve the greater, along with flood water management that is really important to Georgetown. And we all know about all the floods that we've had. And these marshes that make the refuge also keep us safer than we would if we were to lose those areas. And so the forested wetlands are doing lots of things and as they grow back. And so it's a really great story.
Great.
Yep. Oh, you're fine.
Okay, I thank you for your feedback. So 2 questions that I had is the acquisition of the new part that you just mentioned on Hasty Point is, will the headquarters still be the building that's over there by the in Yahana?
Yes, it will.
That'll be the headquarters?
Mhm.
Okay, the second question is, this is a sticky one
Mhm.
because this is something that's been kind of ongoing.
Yeah.
A number of different groups have tried to come to county council about this situation. Pollution is a major problem in Georgetown County, not only from other industries. We're talking about Santee Cooper that needs to do a lot of cleanup. They're behind on permits and things of that nature. But Georgetown is the last coastal city / county that still does not have any type of governance over businesses using plastic. So in my mind, I see influx of people coming from all over the United States. It's going to be a new thing. People are going to be coming in, and there's no regulation on how plastics are disposed and how that's going to work. Is there any way that this project can come on board with other partnering committee to speak with county council about requiring businesses to recycle plastic?
Great question. And pollution is a very, very important and very high profile issue that concerns me. One of the biggest factors that I see every day is the amount of plastics floating down the river, which are typically bottles and any number of things. And especially with flood events, it is really bad. And if you go in the marshes, which are all these historic rice fields, and do any plundering around out there, you will find hundreds, if not hundreds of thousands of bottles that have floated into these marshes, and the marshes are trapping it. But as these plastics are incorporated into the soils, they eventually become microplastics, and they are eventually released into the water system, especially if there's disturbance of soils, and so that gets back in the wildlife. And it is a real challenge. I am a firm believer in recycling every way possible. I have, on Earth Day about, I think it was probably 10 years ago, I did a program with a group of 5th graders, and I showed an image of a log jam on the PD River, and there were hundreds of plastic bottles caught in this log jam. And I won't tell you the color of the majority of the bottles, but it was easy to identify a particular beverage of choice floating in there. And I asked the kids, I said, does anybody see anything in this picture that really stands out? And they all threw a bunch of answers, but one of the things they threw out, one of the kids said, most of the bottles are this particular brand. And I said, what we need to do is we need to engage that company and find out what makes their consumers so jittery that they can't hang on to their plastic bottles when they're in a boat. But I feel like it needs to be a community awareness thing that whether it's abandoned boats after a hurricane, or it's tires coming down the river after a flood, or it's just local debris. I think a recycling program is very, very important, and educating the kids. It breaks my heart when we do environmental education programs, and I spend the next hour picking up plastic straws from juice boxes on the ground that the kids, and my kids are just as bad as any other kid for forgetting about, how concerned I am about recycling. So I think it's something that needs to be worked on, and I think that the refuge can play a role, particularly educating young kids when they're in our classroom setting. And we've done litter sweeps. One of the best days of my life was taking all the kids from Terre Hall out to do a litter sweep on Bull Island, and they were half-hearted at first till I told them it was a competition and that we had prizes for the most litter. And we ended up with a lot of debris that came out of the swamp. So again, thank you for your question.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, we have some folks who we haven't shared their thoughts yet. And we have a couple newcomers to the event. What we've asked is for you to jot down, if nothing were holding you back, what would you like to see at Hasty Point? Something that would benefit you personally. And then what unmet community need do you see that Hasty Point could try to address? Kind of a blue sky question. And if you wouldn't mind coming up to the podium and
Sir, if you could please come up to the microphone because the people on the virtual meeting won't be able to hear you if you stand back there. Thank you.
I apologize for coming in late. Real brief, the rice barn at Hasty Point, what other structures are on it, just briefly?
well, there's the restored rice barn. There are several homes. I mean, 2 homes that were a carriage house, and then a full home that the last owner used. And then there's some other ancillary homes that were used perhaps by caretakers over the years. So I would say in total, there are probably 4 or 5 living structures.
But it sounds like the other ones do not have a historic value. They're recent.
They do not,
Other than the rice barn. Okay.
the rice barn. But there's the opportunity, we've been in contact with other organizations who are looking for homes for perhaps slave quarters or other rice processing equipment and other things that can help tell the story of rice cultivation. And it's one of the only public rice growing fields in South Carolina that we've been able to determine this far. So we really could develop a whole story around witnessing, experiencing rice cultivation, as it was done at that point in time.
Well, yeah, I really don't have many questions other than it seems like I like where you're going from what I've read, which seems to be dedicating part of the park to the culture and the history of the Black Americans who were slaves, and to tell their story, which all too many of the plantation mansions throughout the South don't even touch upon. So, but if that's the route I understand you're taking, then we're good.
Are you a lifelong resident of the county?
Been here 27 years. So I'm a historian. So I just wanted to make sure that was a big thrust. I know the ecotourism is a big push, and I know everybody else in here had other very good points, but given there aren't many rice barns left, and I mean the whole culture of it, I think, as you said, it's a valuable thing to teach.
Is this an area that you study in your work?
I not only study it, I do it for a living.
Oh, excellent. Well, we'd love to talk with you afterwards if you'd like to talk further.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
So, Laura, I think there's some questions on.
I'll get to our questions.
Yeah, I think there's some people that are online that had some questions.
I don't know how to do. Trapper Fowler says he's interested in education, outreach, interpretation concentrating on the enslaved people and the rice culture and how these plantations were transitioned to waterfowl impoundments. That's certainly an interesting story that I know Craig knows a lot about. So that's an interest that Trapper Fowler has. And he has that same answer for both his personal interest and a community interest. He thinks that story needs to be told. I know we had some folks back here who haven't spoken yet. We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Hi, I'm Marianne Mackey. This might be a bit of a reach, but we keep talking about rice, and I do think there's a lot of interest in the rice culture. Jonathan Green, I've heard speaking about that, and there's a lot of work being done there. And I had seen a program that I'm sure many have seen, High on the Hog, about the importance of Gullah cuisine and how it has evolved into many American cuisines. And given that there be some rice grown there, is that enough of a link to perhaps work with Gullah food and cooking and seeing if we can have some teaching programs on that? I think there'd be a lot of interest in it.
Hi. Do
Hi.
you want to introduce yourself and your?
Yeah, sure. My name is Paul Kenny. I've lived here for over 40 years, and now I have a small charter guide business. So I'm working in the ecotourism business, and I think the niche there is enormous for Georgetown County, and I would hope that the refuge vision would entail ecotourism from the water, and somehow being able to connect with the Plantersville community as the group is interested in as well. I don't know how that would work with the vision of the refuge, you know, if there's a conflict there. But we touched on it earlier, but I think it could be a huge thing for Georgetown County to, you know, evolve that little niche there, or big niche.
Do you see yourself playing a role in that with your own tour company?
Well, I already do to some degree, except I don't get off at Hasty Point. I go by Hasty Point on a regular basis and talking about what I know about the history of Hasty Point. But I'd love the opportunity to be able to get work with the refuge more in depth in that business area. Yeah, and my background is in ecology and marine science, so I bring ecology to the concept as well. Yeah.
I've been on one of your boat rides. It's very educational. Young lady in the back. What? Are you sure? You're just here for the rice? I encourage you, we have the rice, we have ability to pack up the rice to go and bread pudding. So please do take some on your way out. Unfortunately, we could eat in the auditorium here. Tommy?
There were a couple of comments about plastic recycling. My name again is Tommy Howard, by the way, about plastics and recycling. I was at a Pawleys Island Town Council meeting about a year ago, I guess, and they were talking about recycling within the town of Pawleys Island, which is just the island, not the mainland part. And they had, I forget who, but they had someone from the county's recycling operation who pointed out that the majority of the trash that people discarded on Pawleys Island was commingled with the recyclables and stuff that was not recyclable, and it was simply too expensive to have staff who would go through all of the trash and the garbage to try to pull out the plastics that could be recycled, and other products too. It wasn't that the county didn't want to do it at all, but when they get eggs or boxes or whatever of trash, and there's some plastic in it that's mixed in with banana peels and coffee grounds and whatever else that people might throw away. It's just as exceedingly labor intensive, and they simply were not able to devote the manpower and therefore the county salaries for those folks to be able to make it economical. If folks did separate out their recyclables, they would love to be able to do that, but to accommodate that. But it's kind of, we the people need to put forth the effort to do that kind of recycling. And although Polly's is a small population, I would imagine that's probably something that is uniform. Craig mentioned earlier about the bottles and the cans that come up and the abandoned boats that I'm sure there's plenty on the rivers and also in the harbor at Georgetown itself. And a lot of that to me just seems to come back to us taking personal responsibility for our actions and doing what we know is right. That might take a little effort, but can have a good positive impact on our environment.
Thank you. Let me ask another question. Does anyone have any concerns about any type of development that may happen at Hasty Point? Is there anything you don't want to see happen at Hasty Point? Yes?
Let's see. Let me mention what I'd like to see. And it's what everybody's talking about here, all the different subjects. I know you probably only have, I don't know your funding, your budgets, or how much money we have. But let me make an analogy. What I would hope it would be like Santee Canal Park, which is remarkable. There's hiking trails. It's geared for family. There's a community center there where they can meet. The Berkeley County Museum is remarkable. They got a first-rate museum. It's everything y'all are talking about. It's ecotourism, it's ecology, and yet they still have boat ramps and fishing. It just touches upon everything that what everyone's talking here. And the point that I brought up earlier is, okay, rice plantation. There's one of the few rice barns left. That's great. It's tremendous history here. That should be. But all too often, I don't want another plantation and all there is, oh, there was slavery here and this is that and the other. But already it seems like you're on that track. And to answer your question about the Gullah Geechee, which is, it's a tremendous culture. It's a valued culture here in the Low Country because it managed to survive from West Africa for the hundreds of years, whereas so much culture did not throughout the rest of the South during slavery. Yes, there are ways to tie it in. I don't know what archaeological finds are there. I don't know if there's a slave cemetery there. I know it was tradition. It was a Gullah Geechee tradition that you buried some items with that would prove it existed there. But to answer her question, yeah, there are ways to tie it in if we can prove with archaeology that it may have been there.
Well, actually, just by the fact that it was a rice plantation during that historical period is evidence that it's Gullah Geechee.
That'd be a great, yet another wonderful addition.
Yeah, and just so you'd have for your back pocket, there's the Department of Interior has designated a national heritage area of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor that goes from Wilmington, North Carolina, down to St. Augustine, Florida. Well, it's up for reauthorization.
It could be linked. There's so much opportunity here to appeal to the entire area between the fishermen, the hunters, and people worried about the economy. It could be historically, it could be tied in with Geechee Gullah, the Freedom Trail in Charleston, the National African American Museum that's opening. Go ahead, ma'am.
I was just going to say there is increasing information about African American history, but the interpretations are not always as full as they really need to be. For example, when African American history is presented, it's basically presented with Africans coming here with nothing.
Yeah.
And there's very, I've seen a lot of exhibitions and exhibits, and rarely is discussed the technology and the skills
Right.
in agriculture as well as other areas that enslaved people brought here. So it's not just about telling the story of slavery, but telling it, fully.
Right. For many of the institutions that exist, there is now more a reflective approach, to understand that we need to look at this with a different lens. So some of that is happening, fortunately.
Not in this area, but I guess it's relative to what you'd like to see.
Right.
But I think that there is space.
Mm-hmm.
I would like just to add a couple of things. One thing that's really important, through the funding and assistance from the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, we were able to do a collaboration between the Village Group, the Refuge, and Coastal Carolina University. And so Laura's role, a lot of that has been funded through the Donnelly Foundation. But what's really unique in this situation is Coastal Carolina University has been doing oral histories with a lot of the residents on Sandy Island and in the Plantersville community to capture as many stories as possible, particularly any of the elders that have worked or lived on any of the plantations and knew a lot of the real factual circumstances and lifestyles and all the things that we were trying to take the approach. If the Live Oaks could tell the story, what would it be? And so we're trying to incorporate all of that into an exhibit, an interpretive exhibit that will capture as much as we can possibly capture there. We're interested also in the turpentine industry. The longleaf pine ecosystem was really the native forest land that was here. The Native Americans burned those forests and managed those forests. And those are really important components that are really unique. Sandy Island is an incredible gem that is got so much history and it's been preserved. And so there's a lot of opportunities to plug into these things. And to the point that, that's really unique with the National Wildlife Refuge, and particularly the size of it, with so many acres of land dedicated to the hunters and fishermen and opportunities for those things. We have these unique places where we can dedicate a little more focus to something other than just the hunting and fishing. A lot of this land was paid for through duck stamp funds and other things that hunters and fishermen help pay the way, but there are really unique opportunities, Hasty Point being front and center, for us to dial in a little bit differently than what we're doing on the rest of Refuge and spend more time trying to get the history right. One thing I'll tell you, or two things I'll tell you, and then I'll leave it. Again, I appreciate all the input, but if we do any construction on site, we have to do an archaeological survey. So our visitor center at Johanna came with a very comprehensive archaeological survey. There was a ferry crossing at the Johanna Bluff, and there was also all indications that that was one of the very first trading posts, and there was also a farmstead on that property. And so, and before all of that, there was a tremendous Native American presence. One of very few places where you can watch the sun come up in the morning with a very large bluff looking down, looking east, and having the sun come up over the river. And so we did a lot of work to not just make sure we weren't building a structure on a site that was important to the Native Americans or anybody else that utilized that land before us, but also to incorporate anything that we were allowed to use into the exhibits. We found a coin that dates back to 1718, so we incorporated that into exhibit. The other thing that was asked is, budgets and staff. That is a very difficult thing for Fish and Wildlife Service. We're at the mercy of continuing resolutions, and I can't remember how many years we've been under a continuing resolution, but basically we've been on a flat budget for about 12, 13 years, something like that. So the refuge system has not kept up with the land acquisition, at least staffing. So we rely a lot on camper workers. We have retirees that come in. We put in RV pads on various sites. And so we run the refuge primarily with volunteers. And so that takes a lot of time training volunteers. I am a firm believer in customer service. So if people pull up and we're closed, and we open the doors and we pre-pandemic and we welcome them in, and we try to do the best we can to connect with the community, because that's how I feel like our existence is justified, and also the relationships that we build through the visitors carries out to the community. So it is a challenge to do what we do with very limited staff and a lot of volunteers, but we get it done, and we partner every way we can with anybody in the community to try to expand and multiply the effect. So anyway, that's the story. I remind Laura every day when we're talking about this that the sky's the limit, but that we're looking at times through a very small hole at the sky, because we have a very small circle of employees that we're trying to get it all done. And so we want to be everything for everybody, but it is tough sometimes to manage all that. But anyway, the feedback and support and relationships that we build is really what inspires us to keep coming in and doing our job. So thank you.
I wanted to just say something that's very important to me about Georgetown. So it's not enough to just talk about Georgetown and rice. And it's not enough to just talk about Georgetown and the Gullah Geechee people. Georgetown County was the seat of rice production. So to me, it is the seat and the epicenter of Gullah Geechee culture, heritage, language, and all of those things. So I think that it's more than just a connection to rice, but its prominence in terms of rice production and the very many West African peoples' culture, language, sensibilities that came along with all of those skilled rice planters, bringing not only their labor, but their technology, resources, expertise, and all of those types of things. So I think that Georgetown County is important for that. And I think that Hasty Point has the opportunity to be another link in the chain of places where people can actually be in place. So if you're talking about whatever it is that you're talking about around Gullah Geechee or indigenous people, you are in place, you are standing on the ground. You're able to look to where the rice fields were, or look to where the trunk docks were. You see what I'm saying? So I think that access to me is the most important thing. Not necessarily that the refuge has every tour guide or the refuge has every person that's there to provide the opportunities, but if I, as someone who is trying to preserve Gullah culture, have access to Hasty Point. So just tell me, Craig Sasser, what I gotta do to be on Hasty Point to tell the story of Gullah Geechee people. And if you need for Gullah Geechee people in the community to train your volunteers or train your young people that are coming in, then I want you to find me or someone else in the community so that they're not saying something all crazy because they come from Ohio and they just don't know. Yeah. Come find me, come find us in the community. So that means we have to make ourselves available
to Hasty Point so that that relationship is back and forth. But I want, as an activist in the Gullah Geechee community, every ounce of everything that's on Hasty Point that I can use to tell the story of Gullah Geechee people. I want everything. So I need to find out what I got to do to have access to everything so that there's this back and forth and we're able to utilize that beautiful piece of property to tell the stories of all relevant people and cultures.
Well, that is a really beautiful statement and intention. That's very gracious and meaningful. Oh, I saw a hand back here.
If I can reiterate what you said, and I know exactly what you were talking about. And again, my area is history. It's not ecology. It's not the environment. I know exactly. There's museums right here in Georgetown County where the tour guide will say, well, slavery wasn't that bad. And that's what she's talking about. And you're exactly right, man. Georgetown County, the Santee Delta, these rivers, this was the mother lode of rice production. The low country runs from here to Savannah. All the rice in the United States was grown from here to Savannah. Up to the Civil War, 50% was grown after. But this is the mother lode. And the irony is the Black American slaves, yeah, they had all the knowledge. It was all the technology from West Africa. And this was all part of the process. Not to go off, you know, the sweetgrass baskets were used to harvest, the flail, everything, the rice trunks were from West Africa. But not to go off on a tangent, I think the point we want to make is this is the new and recent change in the aspect of history to tell this story and their story. But, and I know this is harsh, but it's true. Slavery was a horrid institution. Antebellum South was a society where murder was legal. And that's harsh words, but it's facts with no opinion. And it's a testament that of the Gullah Geechee culture. Anyway, I think that's what you were saying.
It's encouraging that there's so many people in our region who are more enlightened. But, you know, I mean, I spend a lot of time in facilities, not just here, but, and there's a long way to go. I'm very encouraged by this project. And I want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us and, you know, help us to understand what your intentions are, what you might need from us. We all stand to benefit if you guys do this.
Thank you.
Well, we hope you will stay engaged. If you haven't provided your contact information and would like to remain engaged, please give us that information. You're welcome to take my contact information. We are putting together, as a result of all these meetings, an online survey where you and others you recommend can provide their feedback back that way as well. And then we will certainly make you aware of the results as they become available of the survey and the resulting plan. I'm hoping we'll have a big party while we do it. That's what I'm pushing for. So I thank you all for taking your precious time to come out tonight. It means a lot to us because we are, by Craig's direction and insistence, very committed to listening to and incorporating community feedback as much as physically and financially possible. So thank you again, and please enjoy some of Laura's food on the way out. It really is fantastic. Have a great night.